So let's begin our conversation and back and forth. I think one of the most fascinating things that has been going on in the last year over in Europe in the groups has been a participation, sort of a snowball that started out with a project in the Marseille group. I think many of you are pretty well familiar in France. For instance, there are 5 very vigorous MeherBaba groups, and in London there are 2, and a third independent project which publishes Nepi Nepi, which is an international newsletter. I brought along some propaganda copies of that because Adele Scott knows any of you who would like to see what comes out of that little organ are very welcome to take some copies. And if by any chance you're interested, there are also a few slips along there. You can send a check and subscribe. But it actually tries to be in touch with various Baba groups and activities around the world and try to keep people a little acquainted with what's going on. One of the most exciting parts of that, incidentally, this last year has been getting to know quite an extensive group in Yugoslavia who have studied especially Baba's concept of samskaras, and God speaks for 10, 15, 20 years now. We become aware of that just sort of unexpectedly. You know, this has all been going on behind the Iron Curtain. I fairly recently made a trip up to Prague and met a very lively fellow who was in the government, in the Commerce Department. He's an economics expert, and he has studied Baba's works for about 5 years in the underground. And I said, well, how under the sun did all this go on under the communist regime? He said, well, it was dangerous. We were convinced that there was truth in creation, and we had to find it somewhere or another. And there were a few people still left over from the pre-communist days, and we would go and talk with them and meet with them and mine out what we could get from them. And then we would talk and we would try to get information independently as well. And he said, of course, if we had been discovered, we would undoubtedly have been thrown into prison or worse. But you see, what's been going on, we have it so easy, don't we? They really fought for it. The people in Yugoslavia, I'm afraid, may be involved in a great deal more fighting for their concept of truth before that situation settles down. But at any rate, Nepi Nepi's a little publication that comes out every 2 months in England and tries to keep people familiar with it around the world.
They can get it after the meeting.
Mm-hmm. So that's there. Will has quite a wide acquaintance in Europe, so he can also tell you a few of the things that go on there, and everybody's always very happy to get a letter from Will, and when they don't get a letter from Will, they say, well, Don, what's going on with Will? Sometimes this is in French, you see, because he's got a lot of French admirers too. After all, you know, young eligible gentleman, why, he's just fair game for the French field. So we do an awful lot of things that go on over there, and one of the most exciting of all that went on started out with one of your old friends, Elias Petrides. Elias is from the Greek side of Cyprus, which you know has been split. Elias studied architecture in the University of Marseille. He's been living there ever since in the Baba group. He's been 10, 12 years studying discourses and various things. And he's a good, faithful individual. So about March of last year, there was a little assignment that everybody in the group said we ought really to study carefully together what Baba says on a particular subject. This is Baba describing the various planes as you go up to the 7th plane and the experiences on them. And, you know, this is sort of old hat and very intellectual, and but they said, well, we really need to brush up on what Baba says happens here, because they believe that people who follow Baba ought to know some of the things that he says philosophically, that it's not just pure art and love, although they feel, actually being French, that that's the most important ingredient. But they also say, well, that's important too. After all, they gave birth to Descartes and a few people like that. So the other side is involved in their way of going about a balanced life. And and reading about what goes on with the planes and the various experiences, when I came on the Saturday, and we were to go over what it was all about, and if there were any ambiguous points, and did I ever hear Baba say anything about this, or what went on there, or what are the dangers, and so on. Everybody's familiar with the dangers of the fourth plane, that's dramatic. That always grabs people, and they know that if you start using these powers, these universal powers for rather dicey reasons, going back to the stone stage isn't exactly attractive, is it? So that's dramatic, but there are a lot of other less colorful and a little bit more ambiguous points. But on this particular occasion, Alias is one of these just right from the beginning sold on Meher Baba individuals. As soon as Baba crossed his path, he knew Baba, Baba knew him. It was a natural relationship. This happens a surprising number of times. I'm always amazed how it happens, but it does. And so Alias was one of these just absolutely gifted, graced people with that inner knowledge and conviction about Baba. And so here we are about 10 years later doing a review of what Baba says about the planes. And Alias is also a very honest and frank individual. And so he said, I feel a little bit sorry and upset to have to say this, but he said, I really am deeply disturbed because here I read about all of these characteristics of going up through the plains. I've always thought that I was a devoted follower of Baba, that I really loved him, and that I tried to work hard at loving Baba and searching for his will in life, and searching for how to go ahead and Baba's intent for me. And all of this is like Greek to me. Well, I mean, it has to be like Chinese to me, because he's from the Greek. Excuse me. I slipped into my own trap. So there we are. All right, so it's like Chinese to me, he said. Really, he looked so perplexed and so hurt. And I was hurt because this is the first time I've ever been around Alias, and when something went wrong in his relationship with Baba. And he said, what's been going on for 10 years, and I've never had even a beginning one of these experiences that Baba points out here. And we all looked at each other, and I was sort of flabbergasted, because I really love Alias. I think he's a wonderful guy. He's the salt of the earth, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, so anyway, having this come from somebody like Alias was really upsetting. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have anything on the tip of my tongue, and different people were as surprised as I was. And then all of a sudden, a lady who's about maybe 45 years old, and who is a teacher by the name of Antoinette. Antoinette says, well, it's probably because Baba's leading him under the veil. So let's just do a little stop there and think about that. Mark, are you way back in the back of the room? Can you hear me there? Yeah. Can you hear Mark?
Yes.
I'm going to put Mark on the spot and say, Mark, what under the sun does it mean to you when Antoinette says, well, I think Baba's leading him under the veil? What's it all about? Is it the dance of the seven veils, or what's going on?
I think without that, it's 7 blankets.
Blankets.
Well,
Now, Mark, come back to our days on Eccleston Square together. What do you think Antoinette was actually getting at, besides the blanket business?
This is my understanding. Those who are closer to Baba doesn't understand through the brain, seeing everything that is is alluring, but the focus is just on the love. So that does not matter. Where we're going doesn't matter. We're talking love.
Now, he's choosing the second title already, you see. He's trying to trump the game right from the very start. So, forget what he said about the path of love, but what about this business of not going through the planes? This I think, is the first thing that Mark said, that Baba sort of somewhere or another avoids our passing through the planes. Do you think that's for real? Do you agree with Mark? What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I agree. I think
Bill,
he just wants us.
I thought you were going to disagree with me. That's why I asked you.
I just get the impression from this point until we are one with God or in love with Him or merged in Him, that we'll live ordinary lives.
Oh boy, now we're getting into some interesting ground, aren't we? Because, Will, when you say we just sort of live ordinary lives, that gets me a little bit nervous, you know, and my hair stands a little bit on end, because I sort of like my ordinary life, and I also like to think somewhere or another it's tied into the spiritual life. What would you like to add to that?
My understanding was that we're all that we go through the planes, but unconsciously, or we aren't conscious of it, so we're veiled. So perhaps the Mandali are on the sixth plane but don't know it.
Now that's an interesting observation. What do you think about that? We go through the planes, you say, but we don't know where we are.
Maybe Ursula would know the third plane, because she wasn't consciously doing it. And then she said after the third plane, you're talking about the Lord, but it would be a second place. Someone, you graduate from supervision. Apparently, people that are on the planes now.
Let me ask you, can you all hear the conversation? Because I know that there is a lot of traffic noise, because there's so many interesting ideas being expressed, not all of them necessarily agreeing with each other. I don't want you to miss out on any of these subtle points. But this is an interesting point, you see, about maybe you're going through them, but without having a conscious recognition. And you bring in the question of the Mandali, which is one, frankly, that fascinates me. Incidentally, so many of you know the Mandali very, very well. And I think perhaps one of the most astonishing things about them is that virtually never does any sort of conversation come up about extraordinary experiences that fit in with what Baba describes of the experiences of the six planes going up to perfection. The Mandali themselves. In all of my time, you know, I have to contribute a little bit here too, in my various different conversations with the Mandali and being around them, when they were just simply and everyday living with MeherBaba, talking naturally, not trying to play up to the public or anything. I can remember on only, I think, perhaps 2 occasions when a Mandali has mentioned something or another that smacked of the extraordinary, of unusual psychic experiences or almost magic experiences. One of them was egged on by Baba himself. We were sitting out and, there's that funny little sentry shack that they used a long time ago outside of Maharasad. Just before you get to the main gate, in the old years when Baba wouldn't allow people to come in, one of the Mandali, I think who was the great big beefy guy who died about 8-10 years ago?
No, Endu.
No. No. Well, later on, Baidu. Baidu used to be the favorite sentry. So Baba was sitting there in this little shack. He would, because his hip had been broken, and so he would sort of lean on Francis Brabazon's arm and walk out there, and Arish would show him the day's mail, and then he would say this to this Mandali and egg that one on. And on this particular occasion, we've got Baidu mixed up with somebody else, because it was Baidu, very, very elderly, who was standing very slim and with his glasses, and Baba motions to him, says, "Come over," and he says, "Now, Don, here's Baidu," and he says that he sees Baba in everything, everywhere. And Baidu looked sort of embarrassed about all of this, and Baba said, "Baidu, this is what you said to me, isn't it? And so Idul sort of nods his head, yes, this is what he said to Baba. And I had sort of the impression that Baba was trying somewhere or another to caution Idul in relation to this. This was the reason that he was bringing the subject up with a non-mandali from the outside, bringing up the subject. This is one of two occasions. On another occasion, one of the very younger mandali took me into his room and told me a little bit about some dreams that he had had, which he felt were predictive, as a matter of fact. And I listened a little bit open-mouthed, because this was the only time that somebody so closely related to Baba had ever brought up such a type of a subject. But very definitely, Baba always steered away from the miraculous. So, amongst the mandali themselves, as you were mentioning, one just has sort of the impression. I remember asking Erish about this. I said, Erish, what about all of these planes and the experiences and so on? What's the feeling of the mandali? Where do you feel you are? What do you know about what's going on? And he looked at me just sort of in stark amazement and said, Don, all of that is meaningless to us. We've always assumed that Baba just put out these things because, especially in the early days, a lot of people from the West who had been brought up in sort of an esoteric jargon and with various different ideas of this sort came, and that Baba, in order to cater to them and finally get them on the hook, he sort of talked about things that they wanted to hear about. And then once he had gotten them on the hook, he never talked about them before. All we do, we love Baba, and that's the beginning and the end of the story. So he didn't particularly care about the thing. So, actually, amongst the mandali themselves, the whole business about experiences through the planes is not only secondary, but uninteresting, almost as something to be a bit suspicious and discarded. But here we are, apparently, in our day, with Baba not here in the flesh. And what are our guidelines? What does Baba himself, do any of you happen to remember what Baba himself says about Perfect Master, the Avatar, in relationship to the experiences, the planes? There's a very flat statement that he makes about it. And I think because Baba isn't here, and soon, we won't even have any mandali around guiding us. A little bit later than that, we won't even have any of the people who were 3, 4, 5, 6 years old who met Baba shortly before he dropped the body. We won't have any points of reference about these things. So where does Baba leave us with all of this? How do we know where we are? How do we know what we're doing? How do we know how to go on with the thing? Until now, we've relied in amazing fashion originally on Baba himself to get the guidelines. And if we start slipping off, we always had the feeling Baba will get us pushed back on. And we've had the feeling that the mandali will do it for us. Or maybe that the little kids who are around Baba will still have that glow and the touch of Baba to do it. But in 5, 10, 15, at most 20 years, where are the guidelines going to come from? Well, what's Baba himself say about the guidelines? Where do we go from there? This is what I'd like to exchange with you this evening, because, by gosh, this is front and center in the European Baba groups, and they're doing a lot of work. Adele, what do you add in there?
This is the age when Baba's developing intuition. In transition from illusion to intuition.
All right.
So it's the intuitive higher self, and that is every moment. I think even myself, I begin to depend on that more than I do know.
Now, if some of you in the back didn't hear what Adele said, she said that she feels that what Baba has said about we being in the age of transition from intellect to intuition is a key in all of this, and that we have to find within ourselves this intuitive guidance. Now, but let's sort of hold that on the shelf, because I think what Adele said there, to all of us who've been working on this subject over in the European Baba end, this is a terribly important point that Adele brings up. But let's go back. Did any of you remember from anywhere? Because always, I think we got to go back to Baba himself and see if we can find a direct statement that Baba himself makes. After all, he wasn't just sitting around tossing out words for no reason. Baba didn't waste time. Adele?
Well, I'm just thinking of what Baba said about the new life.
About the new life.
Well,
What did he say about
that? Would go on regardless.
Mm-hmm. That it would go on regardless. But what did he say about the veil and knowing consciously where one was on the spiritual path? What do you say, Bob?
Didn't Baba say in the discourses that the masters generally bring their disciples along under a veil, and only in really extreme circumstances do they give psychic experiences or experiences of the occult?
That's the exact statement, but we put in one or two other points just for the sake of accuracy and because they are important. Bob is speaking about the perfect master, and he says very simply, the perfect master almost always infinitely prefers to lead the aspirant under the veil, and only in the most unusual circumstances, when the aspirant needs confirmation or encouragement, a push on the path, or there's a great big thing that he's got to leap over, and it's going to take a lot of energy and a lot of conviction, a lot of courage, then the perfect master will give a psychic experience. And then Baba also points out in 2 or 3 different places that because these so-called great experiences or great spiritual things that happen, the individual, gets all shaken up and says, "Oh my God, gee whiz, this is terrific. I never had anything like that happen to me. And I bet Adele never had that sort of experience, And one's busy being, elated by it and unconsciously, inevitably thinking, "Oh, well, I'm here, And so Baba points out that immediately, just as soon as a perfected one, and what he's saying about the perfect master, because in the discourses, he's not talking generally about the avatars, but when he talks about the master, above all, he's talking about himself, frankly. So it's not just the perfect master that he's talking about, but he's talking about the avatar himself and the rules of the game that the avatar lays down for himself. And this checks in so intimately with everything that I think all of us have observed, especially about the close ones about Baba. They don't sit around and muck around with an awful lot of discussion. Was she on the 6th plane? No, I think she's on the 3rd plane. Oh, did she have the experience of the music of the spheres, things like that, All of these things people like to talk about, intimately. What would you like to add in there?
I just wanted to say that one day when Val came, we were driving home in the car, I asked him, "What plane are you in?"
Mm-hmm.
He said, "I'm in the airplane."
Well, I would say that's a darn good diplomatic statement, isn't it? But,
Did you expect him to answer?
but let's go back to the perfect ones and back to Alias, because this is an awfully pertinent topic we're on for what we're inevitably going into as individuals who have acted as guide points and guidelines to us disappear more and more from the scene. So here we are. Baba says the perfect master, and of course the avatar is the great perfected one of all, infinitely prefers to lead the aspirant on the spiritual path without any benefit of occult experiences, under the veil. And this is what Antoinette was suggesting to Alias. So Alias said, "Well, what's the veil?" And I would just like to ask you, because when I was looking over my notes in the hotel last night, I try to do my homework a little bit, you see. Looking over my notes, all of a sudden I thought to myself, well, but there are 2 other veils, aren't there? I hadn't exactly thought of it this way. There's this veil that the perfect master uses for the aspirants. There's the veil that covers the avatar himself, until he is unveiled by a perfect master. Is that the same veil? And then there's the third veil, the succession of the 7 veils, as one goes through the 7 planes. And mystic literature is rather filled with references to the tearing aside of these veils one by one. Baba quotes this also himself. Do these veils have anything to do? You know, I'm not trying to say we've got to sit down and bone up on this for 6 months, but just while we pass over it and get on with Alias's story, what do you think about these 3 different types of veils? The aspirant's veil, the avatar's veil, and the veils of the planes. What do you think about it, Will?
Well, I think they're all the same veil.
Mm-hmm.
They just happen to have different directions. One is horizontal, one is thick and vertical, and the other one is...
How do you like that? You know, that's pretty darn good, isn't it?
Yeah.
One's vertical, and which one's he going to tie to which one? This is my next one.
And one's very
Easy?
like.
Mhm.
Very like. And they're all cut from the same cloth, but they just have different functions.
I think he's absolutely dead right. We don't want to spend too much time on that, but forgive me for joshing with you. You know. But it was a little too pat the way you put it. But Bill, what would you like to add to that?
Well, one that I would want to speak about is the one that I like, and the one about when he leads the aspirant along with the veil.
Yeah.
I think it's always occurred to me that it might be something like a horse with blinders. You put a blinders on a horse so they
It's
don't,
beautiful, and I love that
they don't
example
get
too.
distracted and
Yeah.
get nervous.
Yeah. I like that. I've often, you bring up exactly the analogy that I've often thought as well. To keep the distractions out the side, so the point of view, the focus, and the energy. How many times does Baba say that real progress on the spiritual path is a question of psychic energy? And if you let your psychic energy fritter here, and fritter there, and fritter there, you don't have the energy that's necessary to do the tremendous concentration that is involved and demanded on the spiritual path. It just isn't there. This is one of the chief reasons not to worry, by the way. He says this is the greatest dissipator of psychic energy that the average individual is involved in. It's not because worry is a sin in itself. It just happens to fritter away energy in every blessed direction. What are you going to say, Dan?
I was going to ask you where our own individual sanskaras fall into those veils. Is that part of the veil that we're talking about also?
I don't find my samskaras veiled from me at all.
No, the sanskaras being the veil. Haven't I read that somewhere with our own individual sanskaras create part of the
Yes.
veil?
It's, as Baba puts it, it's like the dust on the mirror so that one cannot see the real image of God. And it is the dust of the samskaras which obscures it. So in a way it's like a veil. But anyway, here's Alias, and he poses a real problem. Because here's a good, sincere individual who's worked hard, naturally, lovingly, with Baba, going along, and all of a sudden he says to himself, where am I? How do I know where I am? How do I know I'm going in a good direction? And how do I know where I'm going from here? This is the essence of what Alias, with great feeling, he wasn't dramatic about it, he was just lost. He was almost in tears. It was a very dramatic moment for all of us, I assure you. And then Antoinette brought up the question of the veil. But that doesn't answer the long term. Bob, would you be willing to go on for 30, 40 years just sort of driving blindly down the street, not knowing where you are? Because this is what Alias was looking at in his own life. He said, I just suddenly see I spent 10 years and I don't know where I've come or where I've come from. And is this going to keep on going that way? And I'm not sure I've got the emotional stamina just to go on in good faith without ever having any guideposts anywhere. This is what going on under the veil's about, isn't
I
it?
think that's it, though. It's a question of faith and trust.
All right, so Bob says, dear Alias, you just got to screw up your faith and trust. But, you know, I mean, this is a pretty tall order. What would you like to say?
I think that being under the veil doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't guideposts.
Ah,
And if you were not under the veil, the guidepost might be done in glitter and gold and diamonds to take you off the path. But when you're under the veil, the guideposts will be more sincere and solid, and they'll lead you down the path and not off of it.
could I suggest a word instead of sincere and solid? Could I suggest subtle?
Okay.
All right, because I think there's subtlety. And then we go into the next chapter. No? Okay,
Sometimes
go
you
ahead.
can say, Baba, you know, if I always argue with him. Baba,
Go ahead and argue
you know,
with it.
if I'm a little denser, please knock me on the head with a 2x4. Get my attention and put me in
Sometimes
the
he
right.
does.
So it doesn't have to be subtle, but it's not to lead me off the path of the glitter.
Yeah. Okay, all right, it's a good, fair point. What would you like to add?
Just as an aside here, there was a case of the Kaikobad, I think was it,
Keikobad.
who had those experiences.
It was Keikobad. Oh, one day I'm going to have to review names before we sit down and reminisce, because it was Keikobad who had the experiences, and it was Baidu, the big beefy guy who was the sentinel out at the sentinel shack. And Baba definitely sort of almost judged him, but he didn't want to wound Keikobad. This was obvious.
So what was that story again? Because I lost it.
Yeah. Baba, sitting in the sentinel's shack, was pointing to Keikobad and said, Keikobad, now, you told me that you see Baba everywhere and everything. And he said, isn't that what you said? And Keikobad, with a bit of embarrassment, said, yes, that is what I said. And Baba didn't say, no, this was imagination. But there was a sense, and Keikobad sensed it. Have a care, Keikobad. This is dangerous territory. And are these real? Because this is the only time except for the other fellow with his predictive dreams, that this ever came up in post-Mondale with Baba. And Baba himself sat on it. And the one time when Baba said to me, I'll add my own little story here, what went on, because this was very, very revealing to me. When I first started to become, interested as to whether there was a possibility of a reality beyond what I'd been taught in Johns Hopkins University in chemistry and physics and mathematics, and started doing some experiments with thought concentration. I did some experiments on clouds, and what happened was so extraordinary that it really shook me up. But it was a fascinating little story. So one time, as Baba would every once in a while do, he would say, Don, tell me a story. Delia, tell me a story. Albert, tell me a story. And you know, when Baba just says, tell me a story, your mind's an absolute complete blank. And so once I told him Dickory, Dickory, Dock, as I told Tim Phelan earlier, in French, beautiful Dickory, Dickory, Dock in French, which Baba loved. But the next time he said, tell me a story, I couldn't even think of anything in French to tell him. So all of a sudden I thought, I'll tell him about my cloud experiments, because it's a cute little story. And so I started telling him Baba about thought concentration and how I went about this, and Baba gave me one or two smiles, like that. And then I noticed he was looking over at Aries, and then he was looking over at Baidu, and then he was looking at somebody walking by out there. All of a sudden, I was aware of the fact he wasn't interested in my cloud story. And I thought, well, my golly, it's a cute story and it's got a real punchline to it. And then all of a sudden I thought, I suspect that I've walked on forbidden territory. Because from the moment that Mercer Martin put me under Baba's guidance, under Baba's thumb, nothing occult or psychic ever happened to me, except in 2 or 3 very, very pointed, carefully controlled, guarded situations. It was obvious that this was outside of Baba's technique. This was my own personal experience. And when Baba kindly but pointedly cut off one of the cutest psychic stories that I've ever been around in my life, I got the point. I got the message. You see. So, there we are. So here we are, but how do we get back to alias? You're suggesting that even though, let's say, all of the glitter isn't there, but somewhere or another, there's still the guideposts. And This, I think, is absolutely, what do you say, Bob?
I'm kind of curious about this. What do you think the Remastering was all about? And that whole experience that we went
Well, you know, Bob had many, many projects where he, I'm sure, was laying down form patterns for the new humanity and the new age. And I'm sure that Remastering was an important one. And I am sure that the new life was another enormous, even much more important form pattern, which intuitively we will gradually feel into. Let's go back to this business of the signposts on the path. I want to give you a little example of the way feedback and interrelationship occurs in the European groups. I went on up to a lovely group in Duno, where some of the earliest French Baba lovers are located, some of the most deeply sincere ones. And there's a young fellow and his wife, Gilles, and Isabel, who've been in the group for, 15, 16 years. He was 14 years old when he first started coming to the group. And I was telling this particular group about alias. We share these things back and forth. And people grow with Baba. And they share their experiences, and they talk about what goes on inside of themselves, and they correct each other, too. This, I think, is awfully important. So, in this particular group, I was talking about alias and Antoinette's statement about the veil. And I said, but still, I could just feel the problem of alias. What is the next 20, 30, 40 years of my life with Baba going to be? How am I going to react if I don't have signposts? And Gilles, who's now almost 30, very wise in Baba, said, well, I do think that there are signposts, not a lot of them. But he said, for instance, I give you a little example. And there we were, 5 or 6 people sitting around, and Gilles says, I've noticed one thing that's happened increasingly in my life. As he said, I have the sense that I've really been working with my sanskaras, and that some of the tougher ones have been gradually loosening up and liberating. He said, out of this I've noticed something in my daily life that first startled me and I didn't believe it. But he said, I go into a new situation where I meet a new person, and I know it. And I said, what do you mean you know? He said, well, I know the person. I know how they're put together. And everybody looked at him a little bit startled, and as if maybe he had developed some sort of a psychic capacity to see inner thoughts. He said, no, it's nothing like that. It's not a psychic thing. I just know what the individual is, where their warmths are, where their weaknesses are, how they're likely to react. It's just something instinctive. I don't try to predict it, but I know the pattern that I must feel into with the person. He said, maybe I go into a new job or a new situation, and I know instinctively as I come into it for the first time what it's all about. He said, this to me is my indication of a signpost. He said, by this I know, and as this happens increasingly, he said, I don't tell myself that I know that person, but I'm not a good good. And I don't try to predict things or anything like that. I don't try to handle it in a psychic fashion. But this is an enormous help to me in my relation to people. Gilles, by the way, is a very individualistic, I hope he never hears this tape recording, but he's a very individualistic French person. He's got his own ideas and his reactions, and he can be very tough and thorny with people. But in the last 2, 3, 4 years, so many points of mellowness and a sort of an instinctive knowing how to blend in with other people has come, not because he's tried, but something instinctive has begun to happen in Gilles' nature. He fits, as it were. And so he said, this is a guide point. Adele, what do you want to add into that?
Interesting that you use the word distinctive rather than
intuitive. That's a good one. Let's come back to that because we ever get time, because probably time goes on so fast, doesn't it? Remember, there are 2 subjects we got to handle tonight, and we're about maybe halfway through the first one. So anyway, intuitive, and that was exactly his point, intuition. But then I added my point, and I said, well, let me make a little contribution there also. I said, I have sort of what I call my telephonic switchboard to Stephen's pet worries. And the first time that I ever used the switchboard was when I was going back from New York after my first meeting with Baba, and I'm amazed by the impact that Baba had on a lot of problems in my life. So I just sort of plugged into different ones and sort of said to myself, well, how's the inner man feel about this one now? How's the inner man feel about that? Are you still upset about that? Where's your worry pattern on that particular one? Does this gripe your stomach muscles like it did 2 days ago? You know, things like that. So I have my sort of switchboard. I said one thing that I've discovered, actually, over the course of years, is that when I plug into the switchboard, the telephonic emotional switchboard, I'm actually aware of the fact that increasingly, even some of the biggest, tough, knotty problems, they no longer grip me anymore. So this is my knowledge of where I am on the way. And it just sort of automatically tells me that what Baba talks about, these knots of samskaric energy, which produce desire patterns and so on, are real, and you can tap into them, and you can see how you're affected by them. I judge it mostly by what happens to my stomach muscles, quite frankly, because that's where I seem to get involved when I get into an emotional snarl. But at any rate, Gilles and Don made 2 contributions, which get back to your fundamental point. They're not sort of, let's say, the crowbar or the 2x4 that hits you over the head. They're not scintillating. They're not something that's blazed through the heavens, but they are there. Gilles had one, I have another one, and as we've talked in the different groups about this, because Elias raised the fundamental point that we all have to face as Mandali disappear and post-ones to Baba disappear, and every single person that is sitting here, I'm convinced, is brought under Baba's guidance by Baba's will. Not by decisions one made, not by accident, but you are the people who are under the veil, and you're going to have 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 80 years as the age level gets longer and longer, of going 50, maybe even 80 years as the age level gets longer and longer, of going under the veil and having to find out gradually, simply and sincerely, this internal guidance and the signs. They won't be scintillating, but you will find the indications of gradual progress. And once in a while, my statistic on this from my own life and watching other people's lives is that once, maybe twice in your lifetime, the perfect one will give you one of these spectacular experiences when you have to have it. And then don't expect them. Don't ask for it. Don't say, my God, I fell off the bandwagon. This no longer happens to me anymore. Baba doesn't love me anymore. I haven't been sincere enough. I haven't been saying his name enough. You know, all of these things. No, just say to yourself, remember what Baba said, because he says these things in the things that he's given out to us for good reasons. Give us some guideposts. The perfect one infinitely prefers to leave the aspirant under the veil, and only on the rarest occasion, when he must have an unusual impulse, gives him a supernatural experience. The rest of the time, you will be going on sort of a radar type of indications. And this you can pick up from your own inner self, one way or another. Baba will give you the means of doing it. But to me, all of this then gets over into the second subject, which is the path of love, because I'm convinced this is what Baba leads us on now, the path of love. He said to me, Don, during the time of the Avatar, and for quite some time afterwards, the path of love is open to everybody. Well, I said this about 3-4 months ago in Munich to a German who's deeply interested in Baba and Baba's, what he tells us. And I said, what do you worry about all these meditations? Because he's a terrific Zen Buddhist meditator. He spends lots of time on it, and he's such a delightful guy, and his wife is so super that I couldn't help telling him what Baba told me. I said, why don't you just sort of see if it isn't possible to let meditation sort of stand, be by itself, and project yourself into the path of love. And you know what he said to me? He said, well, Don, I'm not stupid. I realize that the dynamics of human love will carry one further, faster than anything else. But he said, I've never had that type of experience of love in my life, so what can I do except meditate? And I thought that was a hell of a good comment, a very realistic comment. And I muddled that over in my mind for 2 or 3 months. I'm very slow. It takes me a long time to sort of take something into my stomach and churn it over and digest it and let it go here, let it go there. But at any rate, let's talk a little bit about what about this German fellow's comment? Is the path of love realistically open to many people? How many of people sitting here have just had such a smashing love in their life that it carried them to the heights and they changed virtually overnight? You know, how many people have had that? You have.
I didn't have it, no, but I have a story which feeds into this.
Let's have it.
I forget who it was, but it was one of the monitors. And I remember him being asked, someone asked him, do you love Bob?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, love? What do I know of love? I obey him. And that meant a lot to me personally.
Yeah.
I could understand.
Obedience, Baba emphasizes, but he also emphasizes, he said, of all of the forces involved in human activity, the one that concentrates the individual and which has within itself the maximum of natural dynamics, it is love itself. So Baba himself, although he said many things about obedience and its importance, still he emphasizes again and again and again. And he said to me, this is the path that is opened on, and don't waste time, Don, on meditations. Unquote Baba. I've upset a few people by re-quoting that on occasion. So many people are devoted. But what about it? How do you get around this German fellow's objection? It's a realistic comment after all, isn't it? Does Baba just say, oh, here's the great path of love, and then when we get down to the actual statistics, it's 0.1% actually have this great, stupendous love in them. Adele?
No, Bob has told us many things about how to win His grace. Because indeed, love is His grace. It's His donation. It's His gift.
Yeah.
And nobody can create love or in any way produce it other than through His gift. And He said when He came, the best yoga for the West is karma yoga, which is selfless activity. And of course, we don't achieve that. The point is we try to win His grace through all the ways He showed us. Self-effacement in every possible way. And He's given us, there's a wonderful discourse on that, how to win my grace.
As a matter of fact, that's the famous discourse in which Baba goes backwards and he says, love, exactly as Adele says, is never happens accidentally. You don't run into it. You don't search for it. Love is a gift of grace of the Master. And then he says, but the Master just doesn't hand out this grace willy-nilly. He says it has to be earned by inbuilding and expressing certain divine attributes, such as no backbiting, etc., etc. And he gives 2 or 3 examples of divine attributes. But Baba is terribly realistic. You remember in the same paragraph he says, but this is almost impossible for the individual to achieve. No. And so he says, so you have to start with something simpler and more practical. And so he says, start with controlling worry. And this is where the famous thing about no worry comes from. Because he said this is the greatest dissipator, and this is the first practical step to developing the mechanics and the ability within oneself to then put into practice certain divine attributes to win the grace of the Master, to win this grace of the gift of love. It's a beautiful statement. We've got to go back from there, though. Yes?
As I understand it, the German fellow said he wouldn't know how to begin on the path of love. because he hadn't experienced the straight physical love to teaching her exactly.
He didn't say physical love. Because he said, yes, human love. He said, I've never been given this opportunity of being with another human being in this divine love, which
Then-
obviously Baba is talking
Then
about.
he's only thought of this lifetime. Baba said everybody can enter it. Therefore, at some point, everybody must have experienced what they needed to know before in order to enter it. So he has to go back another lifetime.
Well, now, that's a good way, you know, when in doubt, bring up reincarnation. Usually, that'll get us home free. Way back there, yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in This Humanity, doesn't Baba speak about love? And then he says, but greater than love is obedience, but even greater than obedience is surrender.
I don't remember the surrender part. I do remember the obedience.
There's an interesting story that ties into that, because growing up, my mother gave me love. Love of God, love Baba, make God your father, etc.
Yeah.
And that's very appealing to a child. It was appealing to me.
Sure.
And it works well. It worked well. Then as I grew older, and there was some thorny issues which confronted me, I came across this obedience is better than love. And that really threw me for a loop. I said, wait a minute, here love has been emphasized as being the all. And so I had to chew that over for longer than that. And I chewed that over the next 10, 15 years.
That's a darn good chewing. I admire somebody who can keep at it that long.
So then I'm with a friend who I've been working, who's also Baba lover, and we're just talking about this. And he said, but there's something greater than obedience. I said, oh, what's that? I said, yeah. So we were outside at the time, so he took me inside, and he says, gives me Listen to Man, and he says, open the page, whatever it was, 151 or something like that. And then there it was, that it said, went through it in those steps. There were more words to it.
Sure.
Than that, but that's what it said.
Yeah. But then I have to pose to all of you, going on with your point, first of all, certainly in relation to obedience, because that Baba has said a number of times. Just for the moment, let's leave surrenderance over on the sideline. But let me ask you all, where is obedience nowadays? Where is it? What are the mechanics of it? It's fine to talk about obedience, but obedience to whom? When? How? The avatar is not around here in physical form to be obedient to. Are you going to be obedient to Adele? Are you going to be obedient to Charlie Morton? Where's obedience? What's its mechanics? Okay, Charlie, you're going to be the obedience wall for the next year. Everybody's got to bow down and polish his shoes. Incidentally, he's got some of the most colorful socks on tonight. So it'll be a pleasure. It'll be a colorful experience. But seriously, you know, I put a little bit in the last little scribbly book that I got out called The Inner Path about obedience. And I said, obedience is certainly historically on the mystic path has been so important. The whole relationship to the Guru was based on absolute obedience. And by God, when you get in a situation where obedience is involved and you come to fundamental grip, I don't know anything that crushes the ego faster than having to be obedient. So I said, if the Guru isn't around anymore, gee, they're sure disappearing fast, at least the legitimate ones are. And if Baba is gone, where does obedience? So I said, try being obedient to a younger person in your own family and see what happens. Oh, God, did I get a static back on that suggestion. But this is a real question. Where is obedience in the future? I'm asking all of you. I don't know the answer, but I know that the avatar is not tossed it into the ash can.
Well,
obedience is going to be... Oh, okay. Well, you tell me.
Well, I know. Because I had to find out the hard way. And obedience is really discerning what is that voice of intuition at any given time. I happen to have two voices of intuition for quite a while, and I still might have them. And I couldn't differentiate which one to act on. So I learned just in a precipitous situation which one to act on. And that right there is my answer.
All right. Now, this again is something so important and time is running out, so I'll do something almost unfair. I would like to suggest that obedience is something that I feel is most safely found and most safely applied in a close-knit group of Baba lovers. And let me read 2-3 paragraphs from Baba's last message on the alphabet board, because this to me embodies some of the most important guidelines to me and to various of the groups in Europe that we know about. So here it is. This is Baba's last message on the alphabet board given on October 7, 1954. About that time, you know, Baba was withdrawing more and more, and people were getting upset. And they said, Baba, how do I know how to treat my wife? How do I know what to do about my kids' school problems? Because I can't get to you anymore. I can't ask you all these things. And you're even suggesting that one of these days you'll cut us all off. And what do I do then? You see? So Baba's referring to this. He says, there is no reason at all for any of you to worry. Baba was, Baba is, and Baba will also be eternally existent. Severance of external relations does not mean the termination of internal links. It was only for establishing the internal connection that the internal contacts, the external contacts, have been maintained till now. I've been around so that I can make these internal links with you. Okay, now they're made, so don't worry, they're made. The time has now come for being bound in the chain of internal connection. Notice he says chain. Well, two people don't make a chain, does it? So keep your ears open. Hence, external contact is no longer necessary. So he goes back and says, Morton, you don't have to be around me physically anymore. It is possible to establish the internal link by obeying Baba's orders. I give you all my blessings for strengthening these internal links. In the first paragraph, he's talking about this intimate personal relation with Baba, originally established externally to establish the real internal link. So the internal link's there now, so don't worry. He's addressed himself to the personal relation, but he used this key word chain. Now he goes into a second paragraph. And listen with a different ear to what he's saying now. I am always with you, and I am not away from you. I was, I am, and will remain eternally with you. And it is for promoting this realization that I have severed external contact. He says, now I've severed it, and I'm going to sever it. And this is so that you're forced to realize that this internal link is there. How often have you done that, actually? Really? You know, we tend too much to use crutches. How many times have you turned inwardly and said, where's Baba? And have you looked? And have you tried contacting Baba? And have you had a conversation with Baba? And have you poured your heart out to Baba in a tough situation, told him what was going on? He says this will enable all persons to realize truth by being bound to each other with internal links. Now, this is sort of a surprising statement, isn't it? He's spreading the importance and the reality of inner linkage, not just between the avatar and me, not just between Charlie and the avatar, but he's talking about, obviously now, Charlie linked to Adele, linked to Bob, linked to Don, linked to Steve, and so on and so on. And this is terribly important because it seems to imply something to do with a group, doesn't it? And how many groups do you know who have real internal links? Because, you know, I can't just smile at Diane and say I've got a link with her. I mean, it's pleasant. Maybe I fool myself. But how do I really feel inside of myself? Do I have a real internal link? Am I being honest with myself? It's not enough just not to criticize the person, not enough just to blow your top, but do I have a real internal link with that person, and that person, and that person, and that person? Bob is saying something here that the real basis of a group mechanics, and somewhere or another the secret of long-term contact with Baba, has to do with internal links between Baba lovers, real ones and sincere ones. Let me read that paragraph again to you because I've mucked it up with all of these Stephen's comments here, and then we'll go on to the rest of it. I am always with you, he repeats this now. I am not away from you. I was, I am, and will remain eternally with you, and it is for promoting this realization that I have severed external contact. This will enable all persons to realize truth by being bound to each other with internal links. This is a mechanism for realizing truth, to each other with internal links. Not just diplomacy, but honest to God, way down, loving the other person inside of yourself and feeling unified with him. And then he goes on and says, "Oh, my lovers, I love you all. It is only because of my love for my creation that I have descended on earth. Let not your hearts be torn asunder by my declaration concerning the dropping of my body. On the contrary, accept my divine will cheerfully. You can never escape from me, even if you try to escape from me. It is not possible to get rid of me. Therefore, have courage and be brave. If you thus lose your heart, how will it be possible for you to fulfill the great task which I have trusted to you? Be brave and spread my message of love far and wide to all quarters in order to fulfill my divine will. Let the words Baba Baba come forth from every nook and corner of the world and from the mouth of every child, and let their ignorance be reduced to ashes by the burning flame of my love. Come together. Come together in order to fulfill my will by taking your stand on truth, love, and honesty, and be worthy of participating. I give you all my blessings for spreading my message of love." So, he says that to realize truth, which is to realize Baba, and really to develop this inner contact, is necessary, amazingly enough, somewhere or another, that Adele and I establish true internal links, and we come together. There is an amazing message in this particular last message on the alphabet board that we need to reflect on. And I think it's one of the principal guidelines for us for the future. But boy, it's a tough job to develop real internal links, because one's automatic tendency is to say, I've been around that guy for 15 years and he still does the same crazy things all of the time. And one reserves one's judgment and says, well, even Baba hasn't been able to change him. That's not an internal link. How do you do it? I had one of the most startling experiences of my life with a tenant of a friend of mine in the south of France who started not paying his bill. And my friend went away and I had to handle this horrible guy for about 2-3 months. And every time that I'd go over and ring his doorbell and ask where the rent money was, he'd have some other excuse. And finally I got so fed up with the thing, I said, well, Baba, obviously I've got to learn some lesson about anger. So the next time I went over, I let my anger go. And boy, I raved and I beat and I slammed on doors and I said things. I said, God, Baba, I didn't know I had all this still stored in me. I've been around you for so long, and here's a great big old black cesspool here. This went on for 2 solid months. Every time that I did it, I would go back and I would open my heart again to Baba, and I'd say, Baba, what's going on? What are you trying to teach me? What it is that you're trying to get rid of in me? This went on for 3 solid months. The guy had diabetes attacks. His wife deserted him. His son deserted him. He had no money. He was shaking. He was a pitiful figure. And in the middle of one of my tirades, all of a sudden I would see that his leg was twitching, and I would just suddenly have a human feeling for the man. Suddenly, at the end of 2 or 3 weeks of this, I couldn't rave and rant at him much anymore. I was saying, what are your family doing about this? I felt a real inner link for this horrible individual. Now, the thing I want to tell you is this was one of the most startling experiences of my life but one of the most disgusting human beings I ever met, who did some of the most disgusting things that have ever gone on between me and another human being, became a human being. And when finally the time came when he said, all right, under certain circumstances, I will leave, all I could feel was, what's going to happen to this man's diabetes? Is it already beyond the curable state? And so I said, look, I've written my name on an envelope and put a stamp on it when you get into the hospital. Please have the nurse write me back a letter what the diagnosis is. And then I had a little Baba card, Baba's picture, don't worry, be happy. I said, take this along with me, it's a friend of mine, and maybe it'll be of luck. 2 weeks later, I get a long-distance telephone call from the hospital. He's telling me the diabetes is blocked. He's lost 80% of his vision, but he is now stabilized, and they're discharging him from the hospital, and the government's giving him a pension. So he became actually one of the closest human beings in my life, and I, oddly enough, in his life. The thing that I want to suggest to you is, this to me, for me, is one of the most startling examples of the path of love that has ever happened to me. I don't think it is the least bit necessary in order to be on the path of love to have this great surge of feeling for some other. The path of love is every action, everyday life. And Bob is right in the middle of it. And hate itself is on the path of love. Because this individual I detested became, to me, a deep, warm human being. I don't mean that I didn't say he shouldn't pay his bill or anything. We were realistic. But at a very deep level, an inner link was established. This to me is the path of love. And this is the challenge I think we meet at every moment of our life. Don't look for the extraordinary human being in the extraordinary situation. Look for the challenge of love in every single contact, moment by moment, in daily life.
I was just thinking that, earlier you were talking about occult experiences and claims, but like you were saying, if you open your eyes to just ordinary life, you see what I would call a miracle. I mean, miraculous things happen all the time. And that's a good example.
The just ordinary life is filled with absolutely extraordinary things. I would never dream of some of the things that, when I finally was, maybe brave enough to open my heart a little bit to Bob and say, Bob, what are you trying to teach me in this tough human situation? Then what Baba would make clear in a surprisingly short time, and how much motion there was. And that's our responsibility to open ourselves to Baba and to say, Baba, what are you trying to teach me? Again and again and again. There is not a single situation in our daily lives, not even the least important, which it sounds incredible, but I know this is true now. Baba has the responsibility of fabricating our lives so that everything that goes on relates back to the samskaras that are up on the block to be worked out. And he does an incredible job. So if you look at it not from a negative, my God, why'd that have to happen? Why did Charlie do that? Why did Adele do that? Sort of thing, constantly. Everything negative, When you look at it from the standpoint of learning, the whole picture changes. You see the manner in which Baba, with a masterly hand, is sorting this out, dissecting that, pushing a little bit there, and he only goes as far as you can bear to take it. But to me, this is the path of love. It's intimate, second by second, daily contact in human situations with any human being, even the most detestable. So anyway, John, where are we? I think we're awful close to time when everybody's going to go to sleep.
Are we on the topic of love yet?
Well, I think I hope I've said the most startling thing I wanted to say. I think every human contact is a part of the path of love and a challenge.
I think, I don't know by coincidence, but the statement I read in the introduction about loving unreservedly.
Mhm.
I keep thinking of that as a child.
Yeah.
As a child.
There's a thing on how to love God. Start to learn how to love God by loving those who you cannot love.
Yes, Baba cautions us, how can you love God if you can't love your neighbor? Charlie, you were going to say something.
You're going to say something about Kitty. About
Oh.
how do you have with Kitty?
Oh, well, everybody loves Kitty. And I wish I had had an awful lot more contact with her. But I do remember the very first time that I met Kitty, oddly enough, when she had already moved to Myrtle Beach. It was my first run. So there she was, and there was Jane, and Kitty was running around one of these funny little beetly Volkswagens in those days. And in fact, she picked me up at the airport. And then after staying 2-3 days, all of a sudden I had to leave. And where's Kitty? I want to say goodbye to Kitty. Jane was there, Elizabeth was there, the other stalwarts were there. And we hugged each other and said so and so and so. Kitty couldn't be found. So I went off with another American boy to the airport. We were sitting there and exchanging ideas and impacts. And I said, you know, it was an absolutely perfect stay. But the only thing, one thing, that really sort of mars the end of it is I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to Kitty. So I no sooner said that, all of a sudden there was a squeal of brakes outside, and a big cloud of dust in front of the airport, and a funny little beetle wagon pulls up the side, and out burst Kitty and said, "Oh, Don, I just found out you had left, and I couldn't let you leave without giving you a hug." Real sweet Kitty. Wonderful person. On Kitty? Well, that was my Kitty story. But one thing, incidentally, I noticed in your Southern California newsletter, which I thank you for sending to us. We're very, very grateful for that. That you have an Iranian group that meets fairly regularly, and I want to let you know that in all of this wonderful planting of seeds that Baba did in Iran, we've got a lovely seed in our group in London also. The son of one of the Prem Ashram, and his name is Rustam Meherabanpur. So Rustam is a good stalwart member whom we all love and depend upon very much too. So, John, shall we pass it back to you and call a night of it? Yeah, that was a good timing on that cassette, wasn't it? Yeah. But you cut off poor John in midstream.
John, I would like
Yes,
to ask
Nancy.
you to talk about one thing, and you had before several years ago that I was very touched by. You said that Baba had told you to always let him know what's going on, and you said that you could even be in meetings sometimes, and you would excuse yourself and go have this communication. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a story that I can boil down, I think, into a couple of minutes. My mother, who was a wonderful Swedish woman, died in 1965. One of the last visits that I made to Baba, I think it was actually 66, when I arrived, I sent Baba a letter telling him of my mother's death. When I arrived, I saw Baba was blazing mad. He didn't get too mad at me too often. I was a good boy, you know. You have Baba mad at you once, and you aren't certain not to do it a second time. On this occasion, he was hotter than hops. And so finally, I said, "Erich, what's the matter?" And he said, "Oh, Baba, cousin." So finally, Baba said, how come you didn't send Baba a telegram about your mother's death?" I looked at him shocked, and I said, "But Baba, finally, I really do know that you're God and that you know everything." So he looked sort of pleased and smiled. "Yes, you know." And I said exactly the right thing, and I thought I was scot-free. And 3-4 minutes later, he comes back and he said, "So really, why didn't you send me a telegram?" I said, "Baba, you know, it crossed my mind, and I suppose I should have." He said, "Don, you must understand one thing. Yes, Baba is God. Baba does know everything. But Baba and Don live within duality, in creation. And it is your and my responsibility to fulfill the laws and the limitations of that creation. So in the future, even though Baba knows, write immediately, or if it's even of a medium important, send an airmail letter or a telegram to Baba, laying out to Baba exactly what is going on. So then when Baba dropped his body, and something happened, God, what do I do now? Do I send a telegram to the Mandali? They'll think I'm nuts. Yeah. So then all of a sudden I thought, well, maybe I just say a prayer to Baba. So I said a prayer inside of myself. And 2 or 3 weeks later, after I'd done this several times, I had a deep instinct that somewhere or another this was not enough. And so I did something that was totally repugnant to me. I said out loud to Baba, as if he were right there, exactly what was going on. To my astonishment, immediately things began moving. And this gave me the indication maybe out loud conversation with Baba fulfills even more strongly the necessities and the limitations within duality. So from then on, I tried to follow Baba's order to me. Whenever there is even something of medium importance, get in touch with Baba, let him know the facts and the details. And so, exactly as Nancy said, every once in a while, I've had to excuse myself, go to the toilet, or go out for a breather in the hall or something of the sort, or turn up a quiet street and have my out-loud conversation with Baba. To me, this is absolutely integral and fundamental in interrelatedness with Baba. And I know so many people who have said, well, Don, when you first said that, I thought you were crazy. The first time I tried it, I thought I was crazy. But it works. It's terribly important. There we are, Nancy.
Don?
Yes.
There's so many things that one could bring up. I mean, what's so...
Trouble is, Adele and I have lived around each other for so many decades. We've got a whole long agenda, you see, always.
Yeah. But I just think what reaches everyone actually is the fact that these translations that you have helped to inspire people to do, they were that task or that labor of love, was it established by Baba? And which translations are available? And are they are available through companion books?
Yes, yes. And so many of your group bookshops around the United States have them.
And they're French?
Yes. Just let me quickly tell you the little story because it's an important one. When I got done with Listen Humanity came about in the following fashion. At the end of the 4 language group Sabas, and what was it, 56? I think it was 56. Francis Brabazon and I were invited. At the end of it, the last day, Baba had Francis and me come up to the top of the sort of reservoir. And he was sitting there in a chair, and there were a pile of papers and a little table beside him. So he said, well, Don, you're going to be leaving now. And I said, yes, unfortunately. And he said, Don, now you finished the work with Our Reduced with God Speaks. How would you like to do another little job? God, what tremendous. I mean, after doing the hashed up, I thought I did a horrible job on the editing work that I had to do on God Speaks, but now he's going to, so he reaches over and says, Erich, get on those papers. So then Erich explained, as Baba wanted him to, that this was a collection of things that Baba had dictated on various public occasions to be given out. Direct material from Baba. Baba said, Don, you organize this in a logical fashion, make a little booklet out of it. It won't be as big as God Speaks, but it's direct from Baba. He said, and incidentally, if you would like to write up also what you have seen here at the language groups, I will have the 2 secretaries give you the transcript of what they took down of Baba's direct words. And I said, oh, that's a marvelous project. So part 1 is Baba's transcript of what he gave out at the language groups. It's sort of a frame by Don, sort of the little statements of what the sunset looked like and what the cookies were doing in the cook shack and things like that. But the meat of it is all direct Baba transcript. Part 2 is absolutely all direct Baba given out material at public occasions. Then a very short third part because I felt I needed to be honest with myself and with people. And this was my reaction to some of the thorny problems related to Baba. So only that short part 3 is non-Stevens, and a little bit of framing for part. This is the story. After that, then I just goofed off. And then Baba said one day, what are you doing about my words? And I said, well, I'm taking a vacation, Baba. And he looked at me as if I was crazy and said, but Baba's given out all these words and you should work with them. And he said, you should encourage other people, because he said, Baba has embodied in each word a spiritual force, and people will absorb this spiritual force, and it will be of the tremendous value in their spiritual ongoing. So you must encourage people to work with Baba's words. So I went and read the discourses for the first time in 7 years. I was stunned by them. When I first read them, they meant almost nothing to me. But after 7 years, they meant a lot to me. And so I came back and I said, Bobby, you know, there are a lot of hippies and people like that who are really searching for truth. And I have the instinct that this will be an important Bible too. But I said, the English and the structuring is rather awkward. Could we do a little bit of rearranging on that? And I said, go ahead and do it. So, all right, I went ahead and did it, and that was the little 3-volume work. After that came out, and I said, well, Baba, now that it's in English and a little bit more readable form, certainly the same thing's going to happen in Europe. I was doing a lot of work for Chevron in Europe, and so I said, I think we need to translate it. Somebody must translate it into French, Spanish, and German, the 3 basic ones. He said, go talk to Audie, get it done, Don. So I got saddled with it. These are the ones that we're doing. It was Bobby himself who put the wheels under it. And now we're going on in God Speaks and also Listen Humanity and so on. But these have been done by a small charitable foundation set up in Europe for Baba activities. It's an important work.
In those 3 languages, the discourses are available?
Yes, all 3.
And they're available through companion books.
Through companion books, or I'm sure that Dinah can get copies here for any of you who are interested.
I mean, they could be ordered through Dinah.
Sure, yeah. Or we've got a number of leaflets describing all of the ones that are available now with the address of companion books on it, if you prefer to do it that way. But they are available, and obviously they've got Baba's push behind it, and I think they're important.
I just want to say one thing. When you were giving us those beautiful, I would say contemporary teachings of our awakeners, and how much they sounded like the words of and the teachings of Jesus Christ about loving your neighbor and turning the other cheek, how in your life you finally, reach that true ability to act in that way, really loving your neighbor.
I didn't try anything. I didn't know what was going to happen day by day, but I felt I was in a terribly important learning situation that Baba intended me to go through, and day by day I simply opened my heart to Baba and then tried to let come out what would come out, and it was pretty damn nasty, quite frankly. I wasn't at all pleased, but by gosh, I saw gradually what Baba was doing. He emptied a pretty important reservoir of deep, deep anger. But every single day before knocking on the man's door, and afterwards, it was being with Baba, trying to open my heart completely to Baba. What's going on, Baba? What are you trying to teach me? Yes?
Could I ask you to be possible to clarify a quick point? I was just listening to a tape that Dr. Bush has made in India, trying to explain and summarize God Speaks. And he brought a point, so that in God Speaks, Baba says that basically everyone has to, in the end, go through the same amount of experiences. He said, say you have to, the example he gave, which is Dr. Bush speaking, that you have 100 tons of pleasure to go through and 100 tons of suffering to go through. That basically it's all the same for all of us, that we all each have those 100 tons of each, and they merely happen in different combinations in different times. Is this your understanding as well?
Not quite, actually. I don't want to seem to be contradicting as fine and, a loving Baba follower as Gurucha. But to me, it's perhaps somewhat more that one individual has 100 tons and another has 20 tons and another has 200 tons, and the division between the negative and the positive is not necessarily 100 and 100, but it may be much heavier here and much lighter there. I think it's a fairly complex mathematical picture, and that it's only a perfect one in the avatar who understand where the balances are and how those things must be rebalanced. There's where the importance of being with a perfect one or directly under the thumb of the avatar comes in. And also, another thing Baba made terribly clear, and that was that although, let's say, theoretically, each individual has to balance out minutely each negative and each positive, one of the great advantages of being under the tutelage of a perfected one is that he can exchange between categories. If I have a lot excess positive over in this field, he can take a lot of that excess positive and transfer it down to this field, where I've got a lot more negative, and help with the balancing across lines. And this is also tremendous. And the second thing that Baba made clear is there is such a thing as grace. And if you merit grace, and the avatar, he may be tempted to wipe out a hell of a lot of it just through grace. And that's it.